Alright, there it goes. Hello everyone, welcome back. And it is now 7:59, so one more minute, and then we're going to give people a chance to come in. So about 10 minutes. And I'm going to mute the audio for the next 10 minutes, just so I can get this set up and get everything ready for us to get started at 8:10. So, see you in a bit. And I will be able to chat in the chat if people come in and they want to chat. So, just turning off the audio. All right, welcome everyone. Hello, Joan. You seem wearing and ready to go. And let's open this up. I had a bit of a technical difficulty with the printing of Persuasion. Parts of it are missing off the printed page for some reason, so I'm going to have to read it from elsewhere. It's going to be fun. So we do what we have to do. And once we're done with the Persuasion, if we have any time left over, we've also got some more selections from the British Goblins. And that's pretty much what I've got for you tonight. So we'll spend a little bit more, like one more minute before we actually get started with the reading, just to give people time. I know I'm all about people actually being on time, usually. It's not what I wanted you to do. Yeah, lots of technical stuff. Fun. But anyway, let's set that aside, and it is now 8:10. So let's get started with our first reading of the night. And we're going to be reading the first chapter of Persuasion by Jane Austen, I believe. And she is one of my favorite authors, and this is one of my favorite pieces of hers. Hope I'm getting the author right. I'm always paranoid about that. But here's the first chapter of Persuasion. Chapter 1. Sir Walter Elliot of Killinich Hall in Somershire was a man who, for his own amusement, never took up any book but the Borontage. There he found occupation for an idle hour, and consultation in a distressed one. There his faculties were roused into admiration and respect by contemplating the limited remnant of the earliest patents. There any unwelcome sensations arising from domestic affairs changed naturally into pity and contempt as he turned over the almost endless creations of the last century. And there, if every other leaf were powerless, he would read his own history with an interest which never failed. This was the page at which the favorite volume always opened. Elliot of Killinich Hall. Walter Elliot, born March 1st, 1760, married July 15, 1784. Elizabeth, daughter of James Stevenson, Esquire of South Park in the county of Gloucestershire, by which lady, who died 1800. He has issue Elizabeth, born June 1st, 1785, Anne, born August 9th, 1787, a stillborn son, November 5th, 1789, Mary, born November 20th, 1791. Precisely such had the paragraph originally stood from the printer's hands, but Sir Walter had improved it by adding, for the information of himself and his family, these words, after the date of Mary's birth. Married, December 16th, 1810, Charles, son and heir of Charles Musgrove, Esquire of Uppercross, in the county of Somerset, and by inserting most accurately the day and the month on which he had lost his wife. Then followed the history and rise of the ancient and respectable family in the usual terms, how it had been first settled in Cheshire, how mentioned in Dugdale, serving the office of High Sheriff, representing a borough in 3 successive parliaments, exertions of loyalty and dignity of baronet in the first years of Charles II, with all the Marys and Elizabeth they had married, forming altogether 2 handsome 12mo pages, and concluding with the arms and motto, Principal Seat, Killinich Hall, in the county of Somerset, and Sir Walter's handwriting again in this finale. Heir presumptive, William Walter Elliot, Esquire, great-grandson of the second Sir Walter. Vanity was the beginning and the end of Sir Walter's character. Vanity of a person and of situation. He had been remarkably handsome in his youth, and at 54 was still a very fine man. Few women could think more of their personal appearance than he did. Nor could the valet of any new-made lord be more delighted with the place he held in society. He considered the blessing of beauty as inferior only to the blessing of baronetcy. And Sir Walter Elliot, who united those gifts, was the constant object of his warmest respect and devotion. His good looks and his rank had one fair claim on his attachment, since to them he must have owed a wife of very superior character to any deserved by his own. Lady Elliot had been an excellent woman, sensible and amiable, whose judgment and conduct, if they might be pardoned by the youthful infatuation which made her Lady Elliot, had never required indulgence afterwards. She had concealed, humored, or softened his failings, and promoted his real respectability for 17 years. And though not the very happiest being in the world herself, had found enough in her duties, her friends, and her children to attach her to life, and make it no matter of indifference to her when she was called on to quit them. 3 girls, the 2 eldest, 16 and 14, was an awful legacy for a mother to bequeath. An awful charge, rather, to confide to the authority and guidance of a conceited, silly father. She had, however, had one very intimate friend, a sensible, deserving woman, who had been brought by a strong attachment to herself to settle close by her in the village of Killinich, and on her kindness and advice Lady Elliot mainly relied for the best help and maintenance of the good principles and instruction when she had been anxiously giving her daughters. This friend and Sir Walter did not marry, whatever might have been anticipated on that head by their acquaintance. 13 years had passed away since Lady Elliot's death, and they were still neighbors and intimate friends, and one remained a widower, the other a widow. That Lady Russell, of steady age and character, and extremely well provided for, should have not had any thought of a second marriage. Needs no apology to the public, which is rather apt to be unreasonably discontented when a woman does marry again, than when she does not. But Sir Walter's continuing in singleness requires explanation. Be it known, then, that Sir Walter, like a good father, having met with one or two private disappointments in very unreasonable applications, prided himself on remaining single for his dear daughter's sake. For one daughter, his eldest, he would really have given up anything, which he had not been very much tempted to do. Elizabeth had succeeded at 16 to all that was possible of her mother's rights in consequence, and being very handsome and very like himself, her influence had always been great, and they had gone on together most happily. His two other children were of very inferior value. Mary had acquired a little artificial importance by becoming Mrs. Charles Musgrove, but Anne, with an elegance of mind and sweetness of character which must have placed her high with any people of real understanding, was nobody with either her father or sister. Her word had no weight. Her convenience was always to give way. She was only Anne. To Lady Russell, indeed, she was a most dear and highly valued goddaughter, favourite, and friend. Lady Russell loved them all, but it was only in Anne that she could fancy the mother to revive again. A few years before, Anne Elliot had been a very pretty girl, but her bloom had vanished early, and as even in its height her father had found little to admire in her, so totally different were their delicate features and mild dark eyes from his own. There could be nothing in them, now that she was faded and thin, to excite his esteem. He had never indulged much hope. He had now none of ever reading her name in any other page of his favourite work. All equality of alliance must rest with Elizabeth, for Mary had merely connected herself with an old country family of respectability and large fortune, and had therefore given all the honour and received none. Elizabeth would, one day or another, marry suitably. It sometimes happens that a woman is handsomer at 29 than she was 10 years before, and generally speaking, if there has been neither ill health or anxiety, it is a time of life at which scarcely any charm is lost. It was so with Elizabeth, still the same handsome Miss Elliot that she had begun to be 13 years ago, and Sir Walter might be excused, therefore, in forgetting her age, or at least he deemed only half a fool for thinking himself and Elizabeth as blooming as ever, amidst the wreck of the good looks of everyone else. For he could plainly see how old all the rest of his family and acquaintance were growing. Anne haggard, Mary coarse, every face in the neighbourhood worsting, and the rapid increase of the crow's feet around Lady Russell's temples had long been a distress to them. Elizabeth did not quite equal her father in personal contentment. 13 years had seen her mistress of Kelnish Hall, presiding and directing with a half-possession and decision which could never have given the idea of her being younger than she was. For 13 years had she been doing the honours, and laying down the domestic law at home, and leading the way to the chaise and four, and walking immediately after Lady Russell out of all the drawing-rooms and dining-rooms in the country. 13 winters, revolving frosts, had seen her opening every ball of credit which a scanty neighbourhood afforded, and 13 springs shone her blossoms, as she travelled up to London with her father for a few weeks' annual enjoyment of the great world. She had the remembrance of all this. She had the consciousness of being 29, to give her some regrets and some apprehensions. She was fully satisfied of being still quite as handsome as ever, but she felt her approach to the years of danger, and would have rejoiced to be certain of being properly solicited by a baronet blood within the next 12-month or two. Then might she again take up the book of books with as much enjoyment as in her early youth. But now she liked it not. Always to be presented with the date of her own birth, and see no marriage follow, but that of her youngest sister, made the book an evil, and more than once, when her father had left it open on the table near her, had she closed it with averted eyes and pushed it away. She had had a disappointment, moreover, which that book, and especially the history of her own family, must ever present the remembrance of. The heir presumptive, the very William Walter Elliot, Esquire, whose rights had been so generously supported by her father, had disappointed her. She had, while a very young girl, as soon as she had known him to be, in the event of her having no brother, the future baronet, meant to marry him, and her father had always meant that she should. He had not been known to them as a boy, but soon after Lady Elliot's death, Sir Walter had sought the acquaintance, and though his overtures had not been met with any warmth, he had persevered in seeking it. Making allowance for the modest drawing back of youth, and in one of their spring excursions to London, when Elizabeth was in her first bloom, Mr. Elliot had been forced into the introduction. He was at that time a very young man, most engaged in the study of law, and Elizabeth found him extremely agreeable, and every plan in his favor was confirmed. He was invited to Kellynch Hall, he was talked of and expected all the rest of the year, but he never came. The following spring he was seen again in town, found equally agreeable, again encouraged, invited, and expected, and again he did not come. And the next tidings were that he was married. Instead of pushing his fortune in the line marked out for the heir of the house of Elliot, he had purchased independence by uniting himself to a rich woman to inferior birth. Sir Walter had resented it. As the head of house, he felt that he ought to have been consulted, especially after taking the young man so publicly by the hand. For they must have been seen together, he observed, once at Tattersall's and twice in the lobby of the House of Commons. His disapprobation was expressed, but apparently very little regarded. Mr. Elliot had attempted no apology and shewn himself as unsolicitous of being longer noticed by the family. As Sir Walter considered him unworthy of it, all acquaintance between them had ceased. This very awkward history of Mr. Elliot was still, after an interval of several years, felt with anger by Elizabeth, who had liked the man for himself, and still more for being her father's heir, and whose strong family pride could see only in him a proper match for Sir Walter Elliot's eldest daughter. There was not a baronet from the A to Z whom her feelings could have willingly acknowledged as an equal. Yet so miserably had he conducted himself, that though she was at this present time, summer of 1814, wearing black ribbons for his wife, she could not admit him to be worth thinking of again. The disgrace of his first marriage might, perhaps, as there was no reason to suppose it perpetuated by offspring, have been got over, Had he not done worse? But he had, as by a customary intervention of kind friends, they had been informed, spoken most disrespectfully of them all, most slightingly and contemptuously of the very blood he belonged to, and the honours of which were hereafter to be his own. This could not be pardoned. Such were Elizabeth Elliot's sentiments and sensations, such the cares to alloy, and agitations to vary, the sameness and the elegance and the prosperity and the nothingness of her scene of life, such the feelings to give interest to a long, uneventful residence in one country circle, to fill the vacancies which there was no habits of utility abroad, no talents or accomplishments for home to occupy. But now another occupation and solicitude of mind was beginning to these. Her father was growing distressed. She knew that when he now took up to the baronetage, it was to drive the heavy bills of his tradespeople and the unwelcome hints of Mr. Shepherd, his agent, from his thoughts. The Kellynch property was good, but not equal to Sir Walter's apprehension of the state required in its possessor. While Lady Elliot lived, there had been method, moderation, and economy, which had just kept him within his income. But with her had died all such right-mindedness, and from that period he had been constantly exceeding it. It had not been possible for him to spend less. He had done nothing but what Sir Walter Elliot was imperiously called on to do. But blameless as he was not only growing dreadfully in debt, but he was hearing of it so often that it became vain to attempt concealing it longer, even partially, from his daughter. He had given her some hints of it last spring in town. He had gone so far even as to say, "Can we retrench? Does it occur to you that there is any one article in which we can retrench?" And Elizabeth, to do her justice, had, in the first ardour of female alarm, set seriously to think what could be done, and had finally proposed these two branches of economy: to cut off some unnecessary charities, and to refrain from new furnishing the drawing room, to which expedients she afterwards added the happy thought of their taking no present down to Anne, as had been the usual yearly custom. But these measures, however good in themselves, were insufficient for the real extent of the evil, the whole of which Sir Walter found himself obliged to confess to her soon afterwards. Elizabeth had nothing to propose of deeper efficacy. She felt herself ill-used and unfortunate, as did her father, and they were neither of them able to devise any means of lessening their expenses without compromising their dignity or relinquishing their comforts in a way that cannot be borne. There was only a small part of his estate that Sir Walter could dispense of, but had every acre been alienable, it would have been making no difference. He had condescended to mortgage as far as he had the power, but he would never condescend to sell. No, he would never disgrace his name so far. The Kellynch estate should be transmitted whole and entire, as he had received it. Their two confidential friends, Mr. Shepherd, who lived in the neighbouring market town, and Lady Russell, who called to advise them, and both father and daughter seemed to expect that something should be struck out, by one or the other, to remove their embarrassments and reduce their expenditure without involving the loss of any indulgence, or taste, or pride. That's the first chapter there. I could say a lot about those two people's characters. I could say a lot, and not any of it very good. So, how are you guys doing? We're about 35 minutes in, so about 25 more minutes more. How is everybody doing? Well, do you want to continue with the selections from British Goblins? And, let's see, I've got a couple chapters marked out for this. Sorry if I was stumbling over some of the phrases in there. Jane Austen is a little bit... I love her wording. It sounds very beautiful when you can say it right, but can be a little bit cumbersome when you're reading it aloud. And I also was trying not to laugh aloud at the silliness of both Elizabeth and her father, because they're probably my two least favorite characters in the entire book, and they're very, very unlikable characters indeed. Okay, so let's see here. Let's see. Where's that one? I already read that one. There's a lot of folktales in here. Okay, so here's the chapter on the spirit world. That is what it is. It's titled The Spirit World. And by the way, I am reiterating, this was written in the mid-1800s. So just be aware of some of the disparaging language that is being used. It's not too terrible, but it is there just to remind you. But here you go. Innumerable are the Welsh stories of familiar spirits. Sometimes these are specters of the sort whose antics we have just been observing in the previous chapter, which was... What's this one called? This one can't be called the Spirit World because this one's called the Spirit World. Oh, whatever. Anyway. Sometimes these are specters of the sort whose antics we have just been observing. More often they are confessedly demons, things of evil. In numberless cases it is no less a personage than the devil himself, who makes his appearance in the guise of a familiar spirit. Okay. The familiar spirit, which takes up its abode in the household, is, as we have seen, a pranksome goblin. Its personal appearance, or rather its invisibility, is the saving circumstance which prevents it from being deemed a fairy. Okay? The familiar spirit, which haunted the house of Job John Harry at the Twyrn farm, in the parish of Mynyddyslwyn, was a stone thrower, a stroker of persons, etc., but could not be seen. It is famous in Wales under the cognomen of Pwca y Tywyn, and is referred to in my account of the Ely Dylan. The tenants at present in the mid-1850s. The tenants at present residing on the Turin farm are strangers who have recently invaded the home of this ancestral spook, but I was able to glean abundant information concerning it from people thereabout. It made a home of Mr. Harry's house sometime in the last century, so sometime in the maybe even the 1600s, for a period beginning some days before Christmas, and ending with Easter Wednesday, on which day it departed. During this time it spoke, and did many remarkable things, but was always invisible. It began at first to make its presence known by knocking at the outer door in the night. But when persons went to open the door, there was no one there. This continued for some time, much to the perplexity of the door openers. At last one night it spoke to the one who opened the door, and the family were in consequence much terrified. Some of the neighbors, hearing these tales, came to watch with the family, and Thomas Evans foolishly brought a gun with him to shoot the spirit, as he said. But as Job John Harry was coming home that night from a journey, the familiar spirit met him in the lane and said, "There is a man come to your house to shoot me, but thou shalt see how I will beat him." And so Job went on to the house, and immediately stones were thrown at the unbelieving Thomas, who had brought the gun, stones from which he received severe blows. The company tried to defend him from the stones, which did strike and hurt him, and no other person, but their efforts were in vain. The result was that Thomas Evans took his gun and ran home as fast as his legs could carry him, and never again engaged in an enterprise of that sort. As this familiar spirit got better acquainted with its quarters, it became more talkative, and used to often speak from out of an oven by the hearth side. It also took to making music of nights with Job's fiddle. One night, as Job was going to bed, the familiar spirit gave him a gentle stroke on the toe. "Thou art curious in smiting," said Job. "And I can smite thee where I please," replied the spirit. As time passed on, the family became accustomed to their ghostly visitor, and seeing it never did them any harm, but on the contrary, it was a source of recreation to them, they used to boldly speak to it and indulge in entertaining conversation. One old man, a neighbor more bold than wise, hearing the spirit just by his side, but being unable to see it, threatened to stick it with his knife. "Thou fool," quoth the spirit, "how canst thou stick what thou canst not see with thine eyes?" When questioned about his antecedents, the spirit said, "I came from Huil-Gesug, Mare's Pit, a place in the adjacent mountain, and I knew ye all before I came hither." The wife of Morris Roberts desired one of the family to ask the spirit who it was that killed William Riley the Scotchman, which being done, the spirit said, "It was Blanche Bide, who bade thee ask that question, and Blanchy bide, worldly Blanche, was Morris Roberts' wife, ever after called. On Easter Wednesday the spirit departed, saying, Dus sin yach, Job. Fare thee well, Job. And Job asked the spirit, Where goest thou? The reply was, Where God pleases. There are other accounts of this Twirn's rite which credit it to a time long anterior to last century. But all were consistent in this, that the goblin is always invisible. The sole exception to this rule is the legend about it having once shown a white hand to some girls in the kitchen, thrusting it through the floor of its room overhead, so that for that purpose. Now, invisibility is a violation of fairy tradition, while ghosts are very often invisible. These rapping and stone-throwing ghosts always. I completely and utterly disagree with his next couple statements about that, but I'm not even going to go there. But that was a story that he picked up from that particular farm in the mid-1850s, from the New Villages. And he makes some assumptions about Fae and Fairy, and he comes from the idea that they're either devils or angels or something in between, and it's fairly interesting. But he's got his opinions and I've got mine. Let's put it that way. But it's still a fairly interesting story that this family, for about 150 years, had a spirit living with them that they were able to commune with and actually had conversations with, and it would come and go as it pleased and continued to interact with them and even entertain them at times, unless it was threatened with physical violence. Then you better look out, which is completely understandable in my opinion. Alright, so spooks and spirits and blah 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 blah. He has very, very deep leanings towards the Christian aspect of goblins and fae and the other world, that kind of thing. But the stories he collects are quite fascinating, at least in my opinion, anyway. And I'm hoping you enjoy me reading them as well. It's only the two of you in here, so alright. So we've been on for about 48 minutes, so we have about 10 more minutes. So I think we've got time for one more piece from the book. And I've got a couple marked out here, but let's see. Realm of Fairy, Spirit Wall. Okay, that's not what it is. Quaint old customs. Derogatory. Anyway. Alright, this is page 338. The chapter titled Bells, Wells, Stones, and Dragons. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's interesting. It's about Holy Well and its origins. Most renowned and most frequented of Welsh wells is St. Winifred's at Holy Well, aptly named. By the testimony of tradition, it has been flowing for 1180 years, or since the year 700, and during all this time has been constantly visited by the throngs of invalids, and that it will continue to be so frequented for 1,000 years to come, is not doubted, apparently, by the members of the Holywell Local Board, who have just taken a lease of the well from the Duke of Westminster for 999 years more, at an annual rental of £1. The town of Holywell probably owes not only name but existence to this well. Its miraculous powers are extensively believed in by the Welsh, and by people from all parts of Great Britain and the United States. But Drayton's assertion that no dog could be drowned in its waters, on account of their beneficent disposition, is not an article of the existing faith. The most prodigious fact in connection with this wonderful fountain, when its legendary origin is contemplated, is its size, its abounding life, the great volume of its waters. A well which discharges 21 tons of water per minute, which feeds an artificial lake and runs a mill, and has cured unnumbered thousands of human beings of their ills for hundreds of years, is surely one of the wonders of the world, to which even mystic legend can only add one marvel more. The legend of Saint Winifred, or Gwenfrewi, as she is called in Welsh, was related by the British monk Hilarius in the year 660, or by Robert of the Salop in 1190, and it is in the Cotton MS in the British Museum. It is there written in characters considered to be of the middle of the 11th century. Winifred was the daughter of a valiant soldier in northern Wales. From her youth, she loved a heavenly spouse, and refused transitory men. One day, Caradoc, a descendant of royal stock, came to her house, fatigued from hunting wild beasts, and asked Winifred for a drink. But seeing the beauty of the nymph, he forgot his thirst in his admiration, and at once besought her to treat him with the familiarity of a sweetheart. Winifred refused, asserting that she was engaged to be married to another. Caradoc became furious at this, and said, "Leave off this foolish, frivolous, and trifling mode of speaking, and consent to my wish." Um, Then he asked her to be his wife. Finding he would not be denied, Winifred had recourse to a stratagem to escape from him. She pretended to comply, but asked to leave first to make a becoming toilette. Caradoc agreed, on condition that she should make it quickly. The girl went through her chamber with swift feet into the valley, and was escaping, when Caradoc perceived the trick, and mounting his horse, spurred after her. He overtook her at the very door of the monastery to which she was fleeing. There she could place her foot. Before she could place her foot within the threshold, he struck her off. She struck off her head with one blow. Saint Bienno, coming quickly to the door, saw bloody Caradoc, in more ways than one, standing with his stained sword in his hand, and immediately cursed him as he stood. so that the bloody man melted in his sight like a wax before a fire. Certainly got what it was coming to him, as far as I'm aware, as far as I'm concerned, though. But anyway, Bieno then took the virgin's head, which had been thrown inside the door by the blow, which severed it, and fitted it on the neck of the corpse. Winifred thereupon revived, with no further harm than a small line on her neck. But the floor upon which her bloody head had fallen cracked open, and a fountain sprang up like a torrent at the spot. And the stones appear bloody at present as they did at first, and the moss smells as frankincense, and it cures diverse diseases. Try saying that fast. Thus far, the monastic legend. Some say that Caradoc's descendants were doomed to bark like dogs. Really interesting story of the coming of a well, and I think he got what he had coming to him. He was a bit of a word I can't use in public, but that's exactly what he was. Alright, so on that happy note, if you ever are in Wales and you want to see a fantastic fountain, I'll have to look up and see it actually if it's still there, but it is in St. Winifred's at Holywell in Wales. Alright, so on that happy note, I had no idea where that story was going. That is the first time I read it, so I apologize for leading you down that trail. But it is coming to the end of our hour together, sadly. So I'll be saying good night, and thank everyone for showing up and listening to me jibber jabber for the hour. That's off mid-frame, but anyway. Thank you guys for showing up, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow at 8 p.m. again with another hour of reading, and I will actually have more material to go from. I'll have the second chapter of Persuasion next Saturday. I'm going to be doing that on Saturdays, so we don't get through it too quickly, but also gives me time to figure out the technical difficulties which I was having with the printed version. But thank you guys for coming, and I hope you guys have a good night, and everyone sleeps well, and stay safe and stay well. See you later.